Hello everybody, my name is Jeremy and you're watching The Morgue, where we take gaming to the next level. See what I did there? Today's episode is going to be a complete recap of GamesCom 2011, but before we get into that, I would like to just give one more plug for last week's episode, the best of MMO music. I've been getting some great responses about this. I think that the episode just turned out, well, pretty darn epic, to toot my own horn. Yes, I'm going to toot it. So if you enjoyed it, check it out, leave me your comments, and you know what? Send the link to a friend, because more people watching The Morgue is never going to be a bad thing. Not just for me, but then you have somebody to talk with about it, right? All right, let's get into the news of some of the major titles that had big releases over Gamescom weekend. First of all, Gamescom was awesome. It was great to see this incredible tidal wave of new gaming news coming out after a bit of a break that we've had. Star Wars: The Old Republic was there, of course, obviously, and despite their showing at Gamescom not being quite as impressive as it was at Comic-Con, they did have at least one new feature that I want to talk about in today's show. And despite The Old Republic being voted as best online game by the folks that run Gamescom, I think the real winner here was Guild Wars 2. I mean, the amount of sheer footage and information that came out of Guild Wars 2 this weekend was phenomenal. And fans of the title have been just chewing through this stuff like crazy. I'm going to be covering just a couple of those topics later on in today's episode, including crafting and character customization. There's also been a lot of information released recently about PvP, but I'm holding off my commentary on that until I've actually gotten my chance to get my hands into it in person. Now, obviously, there was just way too much news coming out of Gamescom for me to be able to cover all of it in one episode of The Morgue. So, I would encourage any of you that weren't already following the convention to go over and check our show notes. I have so many great links in those, including new release information about Secret World, Terra, and Age of Empires Online, including pricing information for that final one. We've also got more information about the sci-fi Treon team-up, Defiance, and the unveiling of a new aerial assault game from the makers of World of Tanks called World of Warplanes. But that's not all. We also have details of Dust 514's microtransaction systems on the PS3, gameplay footage of Torchlight 2, and a new trailer and game explanation for Tryon World's End of Nations. But despite all of that having come out of Gamescom 2011, I think that the reveal that has garnered the most attention, especially from myself, was the announcement of Carbine Studios' new MMO, Wildstar. Now, I mentioned this a couple episodes back in regards to NCSoft's announcement of an announcement, but despite that artificial level of hype, I am getting really excited for Wildstar, and I would like to tell you all about why. Carbine Studios' new MMO offering landed on the scene in a really big way, offering not just an announcement and a pretty trailer to watch, but actual hands-on demo for con-goers that were there on the floor at Gamescom. And in light of the amount of hype that's surrounding some upcoming titles like The Old Republic and Guild Wars 2, I think this hands-on demo approach was an absolute must in order to get any sort of attention at this point in the game. Now, as you may recall from the previous announcement that I covered on a previous edition of The Morgue, Carbine Studios' original announcement of Wildstar included the statement that the game will, quote, learn from players' actions in the game and try to adapt to their particular play style. Now, in this hands-on demo, we've started to receive a little bit more information and a little bit of an example of exactly how this will work. What we've already seen is only the first layer of this introduction to the mechanic that we're told will go quite deep, and it revolves all around story and choices. And before I get into talking about that, I want to tell you just a little bit about the way that the game looks, because honestly, that's one of the few things that we have to go on at this point, but the game does look quite fantastic. It's a blend of sci-fi and fantasy elements showing off technology and magic living in harmony with one another. And while the art style and animations are vaguely reminiscent of Titan AE or even classic Disney era, with touches of modern anime and stylistic flourishes just all over the place. Now, despite the game being visually appealing, I have to admit that compared to some other modern offerings in the world of MMOs, like Guild Wars 2 or Secret World, it looks quite dated. Not much better, in fact, than the graphics offered by World of Warcraft or Forsaken World. That said, graphics aren't really everything, and this game's devils are in the details. When you first are introduced to Wildstar, you've crash-landed on a strange alien world. But even prior to that, while creating your character, you get to choose from a whole selection of races and classes, including the typical humans, but also rock monsters and bunny creatures, and numerous different professions that have different types of combat mechanics. But in addition to those choices, you also get to tell the game why you're there. Why did you crash-land on that planet? What were you after? Were you exploring, conquering, colonizing, or on some sort of academic pursuit? The choices that you make at this point will control the type of gameplay experience that you have, and will be different from other players who might have had differing goals when they landed on this strange alien planet. But it doesn't stop there. With each successive choice, we're told that the story can branch even further, offering even new types of gameplay mechanics specifically for the choices that you've made for your type of character and for your preferred version of gameplay. But we haven't seen those extra layers of tech in place just yet, so only the future knows just exactly how those are going to be implemented. Now already, Wildstar has been frequently compared to Tabula Rasa for a couple reasons, the most obvious being this blend of sci-fi and magic elements, and the fact that it's being run by NCSoft. But perhaps even more telling is that Carbine Studios' development team has been referred to by others in the industry as a dream team, and as some of you may recall that may have been around in Tabula Rasa's day, the same was true of that title, and was one of the major development stumbling blocks that title had to overcome. In fact, it got so bad at one point that the game ended up having to do a complete overhaul and redesign several years into the development cycle, simply because of the issue of too many chefs and not enough cooks. Carbine Studios staff includes the former lead developer of WoW, the co-founder of Troika Games, and the co-founder of Turbine Entertainment, as well as numerous other experienced and well-respected names in the MMO gaming industry. And while all of that sounds like it would be a really great thing for a new MMO, we've already seen in the past the unique challenges that such a rockstar team can encounter. I'm hoping that Wildstar has already seen past those particular challenges and won't suffer any similar speed bumps in the future. I'll be able to get my hands on Wildstar in person at PAX Prime this next weekend, and I'm hoping to offer you guys even more information about the way that the game works and any particular mechanics that can further contribute to the fact that this is looking like a very innovative new title in the MMO landscape. I'm starting to get the impression that the Old Republic has reached critical mass. I mean, over the past month or so, other than the release announcement and pre-orders, we really haven't seen all that much in the way of new footage, new feature announcements, and all the gameplay we're getting out of the Old Republic is starting to feel a little bit samey. Now, that's not to say that I don't want to still get my grubby little hands all over this hot mess, but I'm just saying there's very little that at this point BioWare can really do to build up the hype any further. At least, that's how I did feel until I saw Huttball. Huttball is a whole new take on PvP and a new type of battleground being added to the player versus player environment in Star Wars The Old Republic. At its core, it's really just a hyped up game of capture the flag, with some football thrown in for good measure, as well as some acid pits and flaming death traps. Really, all good fun until somebody loses a limb, and then it's hilarious. Now, they've already told us that the teaming in Huttball will not necessarily follow the strict guidelines of Republic versus Empire, which means potentially you could play this game against your fellow guildmates if you like to. And if the announcer that's present in the trailer makes it into the final game version of this particular PvP match, I can see just as many laughs as frags on the courts of Huttball. The whole concept of a steady stream of repeatable sports games being utilized as a PvP battlefield is much more palatable to me personally than something like a battleground that you keep participating in the same war over and over again. I mean, really, if you think about it, how exactly did running a flag back and forth across Warsong Gulch actually help the Horde in their war against the Night Elves? At least in Huttball, we're seeing something that can actually fit into the environment of the game and make sense to a larger narrative, even if the sense that it makes is just that it can be completely ignored and tossed aside by those that don't wish to participate in it. Now, as with any feature announcement, there's been quite a lot of hubbub in Tor's communities over this particular set of mechanics and features, primarily among a not small amount of the pro-Jedi gamers who have voiced their concerns about their favorite neon-swinging Zen masters participating in what amounts to a bloodsport. Well, to them, first I'd like to say, maybe the Jedi are just trying to prevent the Sith from gaining their pseudo-celebrity sports god status. I mean, think about it. If Darth Maul had had an entire merchandising line and his face on the cover of Wheaties, that might have swung a few impressionable minds over to the dark side. Maybe the Jedi are just out to prevent that. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, lighten up, guys. Really, it's just a game, and Huttball looks like a ridiculous amount of fun. I mean, it's likely to even get stalwart non-PvP fans like myself in there on a regular basis, poning with the best of them in a whole new way. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, Guild Wars 2's presence at Gamescom was pretty fantastic, and fans of the game got more than a treat. Out of all the different hands-on demos and new mechanics and new features that had been finally rolled out for them to experience firsthand. Among the top features that were shown at Gamescom were character customization, crafting, and PvP. Now, as I said earlier, I'm going to hold off on my PvP commentary until I've actually had a chance to play with it myself. So in today's episode, I will talk to you just a little bit about crafting, but first, character customization. I don't actually have a whole lot to say about this, except the fact that given the amount of art assets and the focus on art, as well as all the additional hype that's gone on at ArenaNet about Guild Wars 2's distinctive styles and impressive visuals, I'm a little underwhelmed with the character customization as it currently sits. It's not bad. I won't say anything bad about it, except for the fact that it's a little disappointing after having experienced things like APB and EVE. And next generation MMOs, I think, really have to step it up a notch, or several, to continue to compete in the realms of character customization. What we basically have in Guild Wars 2 is a panel of several options that you get to choose from, and not a whole lot of custom tweaking that goes on beyond that. Now, it is early in the game. We're quite some ways from the final launch, so it's possible that we could see even more features added to character customization before then. I'll just say that as it stands right now, I'm less than impressed. But I've included quite a few visuals here in the show, so you can make the determination for yourself. Now, let's talk about crafting, because it's very rare in the modern MMO industry for a crafting system to actually get me excited. Maybe I'm just a little spoiled having experienced things like Earth and Beyond and Star Wars Galaxies in the past. But there are a few unique components in Guild Wars 2 crafting system that actually have me looking forward to staring at this crafting UI for hours or weekends at a time. The crafting system itself is comprised of 8 different professions, and any one player can actually max all of these out. However, you can only actively focus on 2 at any single time. Now, there must be some sort of cost associated with switching between active sets, but that hasn't been detailed yet at this time. Now, the good news for those that would like to pursue different professions is that when you swap between them, you will retain all of the previous recipes and advancement that you have earned in a particular profession. Meaning that if you start off as a weaponsmith and manage to max it out, but then give it up to become a tailor and work on that for a while, if at some point in the future you decide to switch back to weaponsmithing, you will still have all of your skills intact and all of the recipes that you learned, and not have to start over from scratch. Now, one of the primary features of this crafting system that has me quite excited to deal with is discoveries. You see, every recipe that you learn in this game is learned through experimentation. You put random bits into the crafting tables, hit the combine button, and see if it comes out with something usable. If it does, you've learned a recipe, and you will be able to craft that item as many times as you feel like in the future. Now, yes, after the game's been out for a very short amount of time, players will have eventually discovered every single recipe there is in the game and put them up for everybody to read on Wikipedia sites and stuff. So you don't actually have to go through all the hassle of putting random bits in there and not getting anything out of it. In fact, you can't waste your components like that. It won't allow you to experiment if it won't yield anything. So don't worry too much about that. However, if you're coming into this game late and you've already had access to a Wikipedia and all the discoveries that are there at your fingertips, you might be asking yourself, well, why do the discovery system at all? Well, the answer is twofold. First of all, in order to get your necessary recipes to level up, you will have to discover them on your own. And secondly, it appears from the demo that we've watched online from Gamescom that discovering these items actually yields quite a bit more experience than just crafting them on their own. Meaning that even players coming in late in the game will still be encouraged to use the discovery system to advance in their crafting professions more efficiently. Now, as for advancement themselves, the whole crafting system in Guild Wars 2 is experience-based, meaning that every single combination that you make will yield some sort of experience towards your next skill level. There's no more of this random chance where you combine a certain amount of components and hope that you're going to get a skill off of that. That random bit of happenstance has been completely removed from the system, and every single combination will allow you to progress at one rate or another. Which also means you'll never be in the position of having to risk rare components on some strange esoteric combination, only to get practically nothing out of it. Progress will always be made, and, as I said earlier, always be saved. As for the actual reason for crafting in the game, well, so far we've only been told that crafted equipment will have a more distinct look to it than loot that's just dropped in the world somewhere. What we still don't know is whether or not the salvage system from Guild Wars will be in place where you can take existing loot and break it down to components for use in crafting, or whether or not there will be actual encouragement elsewhere in the game to actually pursue crafting, such as missions that reward you with crafting components instead of actual loot. I'm hoping to get those answers and more, as well as my own personal experience with PvP when I get my hands on Guild Wars 2 at PAX this weekend. Now, if you can't wait for PvP information, I do have some links in the show notes to a bunch of information about the Battle for Kylo, which is, at the time of this episode, the only PvP map that's currently been released for people to experience. So check our show notes for a little bit of information on PvP, and tune back in for our next episode of the Morgue, or some of our mini episodes that may roll out over PAX weekend. That'll be all about more experience with Guild Wars 2. Well, that's it for our Gamescom 2011 edition of The Morgue, but it is far from the end of convention system, and Jupiter Broadcasting is going to be attending PAX Prime 2011 in a big way. We're not entirely sure how the bandwidth or editing stations are going to work out and all that, but what our initial plan is right now is to roll out small features over the entire weekend, and not just MMO-based, but video games or gamer culture or whatever we come across that we feel would make a good video. We're going to try to be rolling those out, several videos a day, all weekend. And if you're watching this on Saturday when it should be released, you've probably already seen some of those, so I really don't need to be telling you all about this, but I'm doing it anyway. Oh well. Anyway, there's not going to be a real edition of The Morgue this next week, so hopefully all those mini episodes from PAX will keep you pumped. But stay tuned as we continue to roll through the rest of the year as the MMO industry continues to heat up. We get closer to the release of Star Wars: The Old Republic, and so much more continues to head our way on all of these other titles. It's a really exciting place to be right now for a game journalist, and I hope you continue to come along for the ride. So until then, everybody, play smart, and remember, what happens online stays online, where your boss can Google it later. Hello, everybody. How do I start the show? Yeah, I gotta work on my brain buffer. I'm on this. All done.